Hello and welcome back to Love Gianna. Today we are here with my dear friend and health expert, Adam Sudd. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Pleasure.
You are an expert in insulin resistance, weight loss, addiction, and behavioral health. You have worked with respected health and wellness programs and companies, including Mastering Diabetes and Whole Foods Market's Global Wellness Center. You are an international speaker for the health and wellness movement and addiction recovery movement, and have worked in mental health recovery centers where you've utilized nutrition to strengthen recovery and prevent relapse. You are the founder of Plant-Based for Positive Change, a nonprofit organization dedicated to advancing research on the connection between diet, mental health, and addiction. Plant-Based for Positive Change led the first research study that investigated the effects of a nutrient-dense dietary intervention on early addiction recovery outcomes. You've personally struggled and persevered through multiple addictions, serious chronic diseases, and mental health disorders. Your life nearly came to an end when you attempted suicide by drug overdose. With the help of treatment and implementing a plant-based diet, you began a journey that led to the reversal of your chronic disease conditions, the cancellation of all medications, and lowering of your weight from class 3 obesity levels, and are currently 10 years sober.
As of yesterday, I'm 12 years sober.
Oh my goodness!
Yeah.
Adam, high five,
High
high
five.
five. Congratulations, yesterday.
Yesterday, yeah. Yeah.
Wow. So
Yeah.
September
12th.
12th.
Yeah. I have the photo on my phone that my mom took. And I didn't know she was taking it. She took a photo of my dad and I walking up the driveway to the rehab facility. And it was October 12th, 2012.
Wait, October 12th or September?
Sorry, yeah, September 12th, 2012. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Congratulations, Adam.
Thank
I
you very
love that
much.
that was yesterday. What was your childhood like growing up? And please share the story of your first loving and meaningful bond that was disrupted.
Oh my gosh, that's such a great question. And thank you so much for phrasing it that way. That's wonderful. So I was born in the summer of 1982 in Houston, Texas. I happen to be it's either sixth or seventh generation Texan. I am also a Jew, which means I grew up eating burgers and barbecue and bagels and blintzes, right? So I grew up with the most incredible family you could ever imagine. I was born with an identical twin brother, so I was born with my best friend, my womb mate. Uh,
I like that. I've never
and
heard
then,
that before.
yeah, right. And then I have a younger sister, Jewel. So born with a best friend, got another one a few years later. And we lived in a upper middle class neighborhood in Houston, Texas. All my friends lived in my neighborhood. We used to ride our bikes to and from school. It was remarkable. I had a really strong connection to my Jewish community. I went to Hebrew school. So I always felt this strong connection to community and being around community and being around people who weren't necessarily not necessarily your family, but they were very important and they felt like family. And I can remember being about age 10. So this would have been 1992 in the summer in Houston. And I'll tell you how that goes. When you're 10 years old in the summer in Houston, in my neighborhood, what you did was you woke up and you put on your bathing suit and you ran out the door and you went to the first friend's house that had a slip and slide in the front yard. You played in that. Then you went to the next friend's house who had a pool. You played in that. Then you went to the next friend's house. You got on your bikes. You rode around the neighborhood. Then you came back for lunch. Then you went outside and you did it again and again and again and again. And that's just how summer went. And I remember coming inside, running in through the kitchen. You were coming through under the garage porch into the kitchen, the garage cover into the kitchen, and then you can go into the living room. I ran into the living room, and I don't know why at this point this is where this happened, but my parents were standing there and they both stopped me in my tracks and they asked me this very specific question. They asked me with concern, why do you have love handles? And I could tell in their voice that it was a concern that was rooted in disapproval and fear. And I'm going to tell you, up until that moment, I was very accepting of myself, both physically and emotionally. I got up every single day and I felt a very loving and meaningful bond with myself that I was excited to show up and be present for every single day. And I felt comfortable with that bond being present for other people every single day. And in that moment, that bond was severed because what became aware to me was a very strong sense that this was not acceptable. Therefore, you're not acceptable. This is not what my parents said. This is the what I took from it. And this worried me a lot. Because when you're 10, your family and your friends are there your entire life. They're everything you have. They represent more than just people in your life who are family. They also represent safety and guidance. And to not feel safe or accepted in front of your parents means that the world no longer feels safe and secure. And I began to become a very hypervigilant and anxious kid. I was very worried. Well, hang on a minute. I didn't know that there were these things that you had to be aware of, that there were things that might not make you acceptable and lovable to other people. What are there others? Why do I not know what they are? How am I going to find out what they are? So I became very hyper aware of people and their response to me. I was very anxious. I wanted to know, was everything okay?
Hmm.
Was everything all right? My dad has a very hypercritical nature to himself. He certainly did when I was growing up. And yes, that moment right there was a big pivotal part of kind of breaking that bond that I had with myself, kind of destroying uh, uh, my self-confidence and my self-compassion. But more so than what my dad had said to me in that moment was the constant daily experience of witnessing my dad walk in to the kitchen every morning after running 8 miles, looking like Captain America. My dad was a high school captain of his basketball team. He was a college marathoner. He ran marathons. He played basketball every weekend with his friends. My dad was an athlete since the day he could stand, and he was an athlete when he was a dad. So he come in ripped. And I'd see him walk past the kitchen, go to the refrigerator, open up the refrigerator, look at the food, and then I'd hear him make comments about himself, negative comments about his body and the way that he looked and how what that meant. And I'm sitting here witnessing this, going, oh my gosh, I think my dad's a superhero. I think my dad looks like every, Marvel character that I was obsessed with when I was a kid. And he doesn't even think that's lovable. Number one, I must be worse than I thought. He must think I'm absolutely disgusting. And number two, I have no chance at ever being lovable. I'm never going to look like that. What are the odds that I could ever look like that? And so I think it's really important that more so than what we actually say to our kids, what you say to yourself in the presence of them has a massive impact on their inner dialogue and how they are taught to think about themselves. And so I just started to act up, started to be a class clown. I wanted people to not look at me. I wanted to be a distraction. I didn't want them to look at me. And so I became very disconnected from myself, and I developed a very poor relationship with food at that point.
And so how old were you at this point?
Between 10 and 12 years old.
Okay. And then so you were what? Is sixth grade, fifth grade?
Yeah, like fifth grade, going into middle school. Yeah. So it's that time where, of course, I'm starting to notice girls. I want them to notice me, but don't notice me, right? That whole thing. Like, is do I have the authority to consider myself worthy of being liked by a girl when everything I'm hearing at home is no, you're not? So it was certainly one of those times in my life that kind of crafted this really, really intense sense that you don't fit in. It's one thing to have someone say, you really like those? Like I get that. Like, you really like to eat those? I don't like those. Like, that's fine, whatever. But constantly being criticized for choosing to eat foods because my dad would always say, how many have you had? How many times is that today? Why do you want those? It made no sense. I didn't understand why. Number one, hang on, I'm not buying these foods. You are.
Ah,
You're putting them in this house. So
right.
why in the world would you put foods in the house that are harmful for me? I don't get it. And number two, why is it okay when you eat it, but when I eat it, there's consequences when it when I eat four versus two. So I became very, very anxious. I became very, very scared. I became a class clown. And then my parents started to get letters from school saying, hey, you need to go take him to see a certain kind of doctor. They wanted to get me evaluated for attention issues.
Mhm.
So they take me to a doctor and they diagnose me with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD. And this was just another point in time where I'm discovering that there's something else about myself that I need to not show other people. This was a person, my parents had taken me to a doctor, an authority in a white coat, for a very specific purpose. This doctor was doing an investigation on me, in order to determine whether there was something else about me that isn't acceptable, that the world does not want to know about. In fact, it's a burden to those around you. And in fact, that's exactly what this doctor discovered. They said, Adam, here's this other thing. It's called ADHD. The world doesn't want this. You shouldn't want this. This is not good. Not the actual words, just a 10-year-old receiving a diagnosis with no context. And this time they said, hey, Adam, but just so you know, we have a solution for you. And it's called Ritalin. And what we're going to do is we're going to ask you to take this medication every single day. And what this medication will do is it will make you not who you are so that you can be acceptable to others. That's really what I got from that diagnosis and that prescription of medication, because there was no discussion about, hey, just so I want you to know, this has nothing to do with who you are, and we love you, and this is only about creating better executive functioning within a system that clearly doesn't meet your needs, right? That's what this should have been, the conversation should have been, but it wasn't. And at that point in time, I really began to believe that I'm a person with broken parts. I'm a human being. Second, first, I am a machine with broken parts. And that was who I was. My parents saw me as a kid who's overweight with ADHD. That's how I thought my parents viewed me and the world viewed me, not as their son, Adam Sudd, who's artistic and creative and loving and loves nature and all these other things. First and foremost, I am a problem with ADHD and I'm overweight. That's how I felt. Even though my parents gave absolutely, they are the most loving and devoted, incredible parents ever. It was just a different time in the 90s when everyone was being prescribed this medication. Everyone was being diagnosed with a different thing. And then to top it all off, I was really into theater, like really into theater. Like I loved it. And I actually auditioned for the high school for the performing and visual arts in Houston, Texas. It's a very difficult school to get into. There's hundreds of kids audition. They only take like 50 kids or something like that. And I auditioned and I got in. I was super excited about it. And then that summer, I learned that we had to move to Austin. We were moving from Houston to Austin, Texas, and I felt so angry. I felt like here's my dad taking something from me again. We moved to Austin and I start high school freshman year without knowing anybody. I was an awkward kid. I was shy. I was insecure. And this was a big Texas football high school, right? So to put it into perspective, the quarterback of our high school was Drew Brees. And so, so yeah, football was a big
Serious?
deal. Yeah.
My
And
goodness. Wait, he's in the NFL now, right? Like, I don't really
well,
know
he
football, but
was,
the
yeah,
name sounds super
he's
familiar.
one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time. Yeah, Super Bowl
Wow.
win, everything.
What?
Um, And so I didn't know anyone. I was very afraid of being bullied. I was very afraid of the social nature of a school like this. And unfortunately, that's exactly what happened to me. Um, I experienced very, very difficult bullying my freshman year of high school. This was 1996, 97. This was before all the advocacy around bullying. But to put it in perspective, about halfway through my high school year, when I would get dropped off at school, the assistant principals would have to get their eyes on me to make sure that I made it into the school safely.
So why? Were people physically
Oh,
harmed?
I mean, there were so many days where I'd show up and I'd be walking to school with rocks thrown at me. I mean, things just constant, verbal abuse, threatening physical abuse, the kind of stuff that, now is taken very, very seriously. But then, it's just high school hazing, that kind of thing.
I mean, like, you must have had absolute dread going to school every morning.
Oh yeah. That's really where this whole thing actually starts.
Okay.
I would say depression is a form of grief for your life not being as it should. And anxiety are these very strong alarm bells. They are trying to get your attention because they believe that there's something so unsafe about your life that you need to get your attention on it. The problem is psychosocial anxiety can't be identified, right? So you're constantly waking up going, what's going on? How can I prevent it from happening tomorrow? How did that happen to me today? Why did I not see it coming? How can I prevent it from happening tomorrow? You're up all night anxiously trying to fill that puzzle piece and you never can. You're anxiously trying to defend yourself against a future that you can't predict or defend yourself against. And so every single day was just consistently flooded with depression and anxiety.
Hmm.
And at that point in time, my prescription from Ritalin had been changed to Adderall. And I would take one
What's
dose
the
in the
difference?
morning.
What's the difference?
It was a newer dose, a newer medication.
But supposedly the same desired result.
Amphetamines work by boosting dopamine levels. Yes, they also increase your energy output, right? They give you more energy. But for individuals who have ADHD, who are ADHD brains or anxious brains, you would consider these people to have what's called interest-based nervous systems, meaning that we're only focusing on what we're interested in, and if it isn't interesting enough, we don't focus on it at all. We do not care. We don't want to look at it. We don't want to pay attention to it. Whereas what we would call a neurotypical brain can decide where to put their focus and attention. They can get just enough interest out of it. Their brain will release dopamine to compel them to be more interested a little bit longer, a little bit longer. ADHD brains don't really function that way. Um, I like to say there's two times that we like to do things: now or not now, and not now doesn't mean later. So if it isn't something we're interested in, I genuinely don't care and I won't listen. I won't pay attention. It's not because I don't want to. It's because my brain just has no interest in it whatsoever. Adderall will flood your brain and your blood system with dopamine, and dopamine forces interest,
Hmm.
right? Dopamine gives you the sense that whatever you're doing is important and potentially important for your survival. So you can now maintain focus longer. It is actually very effective at treating ADHD, but it is also a stimulant. It's a very powerful stimulant. And I remember taking my second dose in the middle of class. And as I'm walking out of the class, I would normally turn left instead of right. And as I walk out, I feel this arm come around my neck and like yank me over to the left. And it is one of the a few of the guys who would bully me consistently. But this was a little bit different. It wasn't that we're gonna beat you up kind of feeling. It was like, hey, get over here. And they said, hey, Adam, listen, I want you to know the hazing's over. You're new, you're a freshman. Obviously, it's like this is just the way it is. And come on, buddy. But listen, we're gonna make it up to you. We want to invite you to a party this weekend. So yeah, you're invited. Oh, by the way, bring that Adderall with you that we saw you taking class. And look, I'm going to tell you right now, I may have been awkward. I may have been insecure. I was certainly a nerd, but I was certainly not stupid.
Yeah.
And I knew exactly what was taking place. But here's the interesting thing. I felt immense relief. I felt relief because it seemed like I may have figured out a way to feel a little bit safer in a life that didn't feel safe. And so I went to this party and I brought the Adderall with me. I gave it to those individuals. And in fact, that was the first time I ever used Adderall as a recreational drug. Didn't actually know that that was something that people did.
How does Adderall make a neurotypical brain function differently from an ADH brain? Why do people use it as a recreational drug?
Because it's essentially, if you were to take Adderall and the molecular structure of Adderall and compare it to meth, it's essentially the same minus one molecule. It's basically methamphetamine.
So
That's what it is.
what does it do to people with a neurotypical brain?
It does the same thing that it does to me in high doses. So if you were to take high doses of it, it gives you the same feeling of being like on cocaine or being on meth, which is an incredible party drug. It's an incredible party sensation. You're flooded with confidence. You're flooded with energy. Everything is interesting. And you want to talk about everything, and everything's amazing. It's this incredible, like superhero like feeling. And it does feel amazing. And in fact, that's exactly what I felt when I took Adderall as a recreational drug. I took high doses of it for the first time. And I was flooded with this feeling that I had been missing my whole life. I always wanted to feel confident. I always wanted to have energy. I always wanted to feel like being in the room was safe. I always wanted to feel like I had lots of energy. And I wanted to know what it was like to be in a room where people were talking about something and I was excited to talk to them about it, even if it wasn't something typically interesting to me, but just to be around people. And I was flooded with this feeling that I've been looking for, missing, and grieving my whole life with ease and repeatability. I noticed people seemed to want me around. Now, I know it wasn't friendship, but Gianna, it looked enough like it. And when you're a lonely, scared kid who's being bullied all the time, having something that looks enough like friendship with ease and repeatability is incredibly attractive.
Oh,
I
sorry.
noticed that as I continued to take the drugs over the course of the next 2 weeks, I just was so attracted to the feeling. I just kept taking high doses of it. I noticed all of a sudden I'm losing weight. I had no hunger drive. My metabolism is going through the roof. I also noticed that my dad is treating me differently.
How was your
All
dad
of
treating
a sudden, when I go down to study about anything, homework, whatever subject it is, on high doses of Adderall, it's great. I like this. I can get this done. Two things are happening. My dad is witnessing me be a student that he's proud of for the first time. My dad is witnessing me go to school day after day and not complain about it. My dad is witnessing me lose weight. My dad is witnessing me make friends. My dad, from his perspective, saw his son finding his place in the world. And he treated me the way I had always wanted my dad to treat me, which was to be really proud of who I was becoming, even though he did that enough times, sure, but there was something lacking in our relationship. And this solved it with ease and repeatability. I felt like I had figured it out. I've got it figured it out. I can be the student I need to be. I can be the friend I need to be in high school. I can be the healthy version of myself I need to be. I can get the girlfriends. I can get the scholarship. I can go to the college that I want to go to. All I need to do it is this pill. And that's fine because I can get it. I'm good. I've solved it. I am freaking in charge here. And you can't convince me differently because you don't know what my life was like before I used, and you have no idea how good I feel right now. So, this whole story about drug addiction becoming a problem for me in 10 years, I don't buy it. I'm winning, and I bonded with drug use. Drug use became my loving and meaningful bond in life. And you couldn't convince me that it was a problem. Unfortunately, I am no different than any other human being on the planet. And the trajectory of drug use moved into drug abuse, and then it went into substance use disorder, where the need and the presence for substances became so big, it pushed out every other important thing in my life. It disordered my ability to care for myself. And I dropped out of college. I told my parents I wanted to come work take a year off and work, whatever. The only reason I wanted to move back to Austin was because in Austin, I knew the dealers that I could buy from, I knew the doctors that I could scam, and that's exactly what I started doing. I started doctor shopping. That's where you have multiple doctors prescribing the same medications without them knowing about it. It's a felony. I was forging prescriptions, which is also a felony. I was buying and selling drugs on the street. I was stealing from people. I would treat my family like absolute garbage. I mean, at this point, the only time I would ever really interact with my parents was to get money from them or to blame them and shame them for everything that was wrong in my life because it couldn't be me and it certainly couldn't be the drugs. Like you couldn't convince me that I couldn't figure this thing out. I knew, I mean, trust me, I knew things were going in a direction I didn't want them to go. And I just had this belief that like, man, no, 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 no. I know this works. I've seen how great this can be. I've just got to figure it out. If I could just get more, if I can just get enough, I can figure this thing out. The problem is I just keep running out. I got to figure out a way to not run out. If I can not run out, I'm going to win. I was going through so much that there would be 2 weeks where I couldn't get a hold of anything that I wanted to use. And I needed something because my life had become so isolated and depressed and things were going downhill and I didn't know what to do. And fast food became my secondary substance use. I mean, I would eat 5,000 calories of fast food a day for like a week straight. just so that I didn't have to be present in life. Nothing was easier than going through McDonald's drive-through and getting like 5 cheeseburgers and then just eating them and this just and just passing out and not having to be present in life. And then not worry about the consequences of all those calories because gosh, if I just get enough stimulant, that won't even be an issue. So this is going to be fine. Like I'll eat my way through this week and then I'll drug my way through the next 2 weeks and I'll work it off. I would eat about 5,000 calories of fast food a day for 7 days straight, seven to 10 days straight. And when I tell you I had a problem with Adderall, the average prescription for Adderall is about 10 to 20 milligrams for every 24 hours. By this point in my life, I was doing a minimum of 450 milligrams and upwards of 1,000 milligrams a day. And I would do that for 6 days straight. And in those 6 days, I wouldn't sleep. I wouldn't sleep. I wouldn't eat. I would end up in the beginning stages of what's called a drug-induced psychosis, where you start to hallucinate, you start to be very paranoid. I would develop very debilitating obsessive compulsive tics, one of which was I couldn't stand to feel hair touch my ear. And I remember one night I was up, this is probably day 4 of being up for 4 days straight on thousands of milligrams of Adderall at that point and brushing my hair forward and back because it was bothering me so much. And I was doing it all night long. And when I went into the bathroom in the morning and I looked in the mirror, I'd brushed all the hair completely off the side of my head. I would at this point need something to kind of break this cycle because I was always chasing that feeling of being on a high dose of stimulants. And so I would find oxys or some kind of opiate to get me to fall asleep, wake up, and then I would just start that whole cycle over again. And I did that for years. And by 2010, I was over 300 pounds. And my dad, who had every reason to give up on me, my dad called me. He said, Adam, I want you to, will you come to the office? I just want to talk to you. Like, you're not in trouble. There's nothing wrong. Like, just please, will you come talk to me? I always dreaded phone calls with my dad. And believe me, I want everyone to listen. Like I know when I talk about my dad when I was a kid, that kind of paints him as like this kind of very, mean person. But I want you to understand my dad is the greatest man I've ever known in my life. Um, and what I'm not describing is the points from between when I went to college and up to this point in 2010, where I made him the greatest villain on earth. I was the worst son you could imagine. And I said horrible things. I did horrible things. I was entitled. I was arrogant. And he loved me anyways. And he did everything for me.
Hmm.
And he called me this day in 2010. He said, come to the office. I just want to talk to you. So I get there. He says, Adam, listen, I don't, I'm not going to try to figure out what's going on with you. Like, I mean, I'm sure I'm sure that there are things going on, but here's what's going on. My dad is one of the founding investors of Whole Foods Market, and at the time they had partnered with a guy named Rip Esselstyn, and Rip at the time had written a book called The Engine 2 Diet. And John Mackey, the CEO of Whole Foods, had read that book and decided that this is something really incredible that he wants to offer to the employees of Whole Foods Market. And so they created these immersion programs, so like these 6, 7 day retreats where you would go with Rip Esselstyn and his team in order to learn how to live a plant-based lifestyle. My dad was saying, Adam, I know you don't work for Whole Foods, and this is only for Whole Foods Market employees, but I think this would be so valuable for you, and I want you to go. They have a few spots open. I can get you in, but you have to meet with Rip. You have to convince him to give you a spot because we're only supposed to give these to Whole Foods Market employees, and you're not a Whole Foods Market employee. I'm gonna get the sunbeam out of my face, and you're not a Whole Foods Market employee. So I go down to Rip's office on like the 4th floor of the Whole Foods headquarters, and I walk in, and you want to talk about looking like Captain America? You should have seen Rip in 2010. Oh my gosh, I was so intimidated. Here I am, this overweight, dirty, drug addicted loser talking to Rip Esselstyn. And, I did exactly what drug addicts do really well. I put on a show and lied my ass off. Said, oh, Rip, actually, my dad mentioned, your book. And I looked at it in his office and I read a little bit. And it sounds really cool. I'd really love it if I could go. And if you give me a spot, like I promise you, I'm going to do this thing. I'm going to tell you right now, Gianna, I didn't know what a plant-based diet was. I didn't want to know what a plant-based diet was. I didn't know who Rip Esselstyn was, and I sure as shit didn't want to know who he was. What I did know was that if I could convince my dad that I was going to do this thing, he would give me money. That's what I was convinced of. And Rip gave me a spot, and I
Did
went.
your dad say, okay, I'm going to give you money if you do this? Or was your dad
Oh,
like,
but
how
my
were
my
you, like, were you living at home or were you living in an apartment?
I was living in an apartment,
And how are
and
you paying the rent?
so I would get odd jobs,
Mhm.
I would work here and there. And, my dad was, gracious enough to give me just enough to cover my rent every month. And I had this sense that, like, if I convinced my dad, hey, dad, I'm going to do this plant strong thing, and it's going to be really hard. And it's probably going to take me like 6 months to do it. And so I really want to focus on it 100%. So if you could just give me a little bit more money and make it easier for me to buy all these foods and do all this stuff, like I had this whole idea that that's what I was going to do and then spend all that extra money on drugs. And I showed up to Rip's retreat and I was high out of my mind. I mean, at this point I was diaphoretic, which means I was flushed red all the time. I'd sweat through like 3 shirts a day. I wouldn't shower for like months at a time. I smelled very toxic. I lived like a hoarder, and I wish I could tell you that after those 7 days of that retreat, listening to luminary thought leaders, doctors, and experts like Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn, Jeff Novick, Chef AJ, Ann Esselstyn, Rip and Jane, all these incredible individuals presenting this very compelling argument that a lifestyle built around plants is not only good for you, good for your future. And it also struck a chord with me uh, in the opportunity to be a good steward to the animals and the planet.
Yeah.
I grew up very bonded to my grandmother, and she absolutely adored nature. In fact, when I was born, my grandmother took me and my brother both outside so that she could be the one that allowed us to touch a tree for the first time. So it really like spoke to my heart and my soul, and I really wanted to do this thing. And I wish I could tell you that even after 7 days, like kind of feeling better and seeing the results, that was it. I was going to do it. But the thing is, I just wasn't willing to give up what was allowing me to escape a life that was too painful a place to be on the gamble that this diet might work for me in a year. Right? It was too I was lonely. I was isolated. I felt scared. I felt like, what if I fail at this? I don't know what to do. And so my life just got worse. By 2012, my life was the worst it had ever been. I was nearly 350 pounds. I was 2 weeks away from being homeless. I had erectile dysfunction for reasons I didn't understand. I had infected cuts on my legs that wouldn't heal for reasons I didn't understand. My parents were barely talking to me. My sister hadn't spoken to me in like a year. And I've been battling, the idea of not living for probably 6 months, but I didn't have a plan. I didn't like write a note or anything. Um, but on August 21st of 2012, I tried to end my life. I was sitting in my apartment and I had been up for days, so I was high already. And I just saw these pills on the table and I just took one
What
and then
pill? What
oh,
pill?
I mean, it was a combination of Adderall and some other things. I think it was some like very, very old opiates. I can't even remember what actually ended up taking, but I just kept taking them. And I can remember the feeling of the overdose starting to take effect because look, I'd had overdoses before, so that wasn't something I was I knew what that was going to feel like, but it felt a little this felt distinctly different. Um, and that feeling where if you stand up really quickly and you get lightheaded, that kind of feeling of like having your blood pressure drop. I kind of started to feel like that. I started to feel like my heart rate was racing and then dropping. I started to sweat. And I thought, well, let me just stand up and shake this off. And as I stood up, my entire right side of my body cramped and it felt like I got stabbed in the right side with a hot knife. And I started to fall forward. And as I started falling forward, I was trying to catch myself and my vision just goes black. And I'm going to tell you that the feeling that I had in that moment, and I'm not talking about the physical description. that I just laid out. I'm talking about the feeling that I had. I believed I was experiencing the last second of my life. And not only did I believe I was experiencing the last second of my life, I was doing so completely separated from everything and everyone I've ever loved because of me. And I don't know what it feels like to die, but I do know what it feels like to believe that you're dying with a life full of regret.
Mm.
And that is the most terrifying moment I've ever had. I remember thinking to myself, like as the world closed its doors, I just remember thinking, like saying this prayer, like just asking for one more second. And I woke up in a puddle of my own vomit in a pile of fast food garbage, surrounded by empty bottles, like just in the like the debris of the disaster of my life. And I was overwhelmed with immense relief. Like it was all, like every cell in my body was just shouting relief. And I didn't get it at first because what what I just tried to do was I thought I tried to stop my life. I thought I was trying to end my life. And look, I get it. Like I mean, I was that person that we all know. Like if I was in your life then and you knew me and you loved me, John, at some point you would have come up to me and said, Adam, what are you doing? What don't you see what's happening to you? Don't you see the impact it has on you? Don't you know what's gonna cost you? Why won't you stop? People used to ask me that all the time. Why won't you stop? What are you doing? Why won't you stop? And you know what I used to say to them? I used to say, F you. I used to say, you know what? You have no idea what my life is like. This is how I do it. And you know what? I don't care. If it costs me 10 years, fine. I used to say that a lot. And I used to say it like it meant nothing. 10 years. I think about if I had been successful that day, you know, what would my family not do for 10 more years? What would they not do for 10 more minutes with me? You know, the things that we choose to say and believe, they have real consequences.
Wow.
They're not just on us, they're mostly on the people we care about. And I remember thinking that I don't know if I'll ever love myself enough to make this phone call, but I do love my family enough to make this phone call. And I picked up the phone and I called my parents and I asked for help. And without judgment, without question, they said, Adam, we love you. We don't know what to do, but come home and we'll help you figure this out. And 2 weeks later, I checked in to rehab, which would have been 12 years ago yesterday. And I remember walking into the doors of rehab. I was high. I couldn't do life without drugs at that time. That's just how it was. And I remember walking into the doors and looking down the hallway, and there's these two double doors, and that's the entrance to not the main area of the rehab hospital, but to the detox area. And the doors open, and this nurse comes walking down the hallway. And I've heard stories of detox. I'd seen dramatic expressions of it in film and cinema, so I was very afraid. And the nurse took me by the hand and she didn't really even say anything, but I just felt like I knew I was just supposed to follow her. And we start walking down the hallway and I turn back and I see my mom and my dad and I see them, just throwing their arms around each other. And my dad is crying. And I'd only ever seen my dad cry once before that. And that's when his mom died in an accident. And I had this real like kind of moment of like, wait a minute, my dad's been my greatest ally my whole life, and I chose to believe differently. I remember that moment witnessing my dad like fully express his like concern and fear and hopes in the form of tears for me could just change my relationship with my dad completely. Like him being willing to do that, it like openly just completely changed my relationship with him. I checked into the detox and they put me through a whole host of psychological evaluations, physical examinations, biomedical testing. It was actually a really just very difficult 72 hours. Um, I felt like a criminal. They search you, they strip search you, they search your bags, they search all your things, and they do that for a very specific reason.
Yeah.
People who are entering into a rehab hospital, this is an extraordinary journey they're about to go on. It's a very terrifying one. So it would be very reasonable to recognize that these individuals would want to bring with them the one thing that makes their difficult life feel safe, which is their drug. We're not doing that to put anyone else at risk. We're not doing it to break the rules. We're doing it because we're terrified. And so that's why they were doing it.
Did you
That's why
bring drugs?
no, 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 I didn't. But that is why they do it. And then I got the results of all this testing. And I walked into the doctor's office and I found out that I was diagnosed with advanced type 2 diabetes. My blood pressure was 210 over 120. My cholesterol was over 300. I was diagnosed with erectile dysfunction, which I already knew that I had. I was diagnosed with suicidal depression, anxiety disorder, sleep disorder, attention deficit disorder, obsessive compulsive personality disorder. Um, they put me on a whole host of medications for life. And I'm sitting across the desk from this doctor, and this is what the doctor says: Adam, your diabetes is so advanced. We're going to put you on the highest amount of oral medication. It's likely not going to be a solution for long. You're likely going to be on insulin. So here's the reality. You're looking at you're at risk of amputation, going blind, all these other things. We're going to do the medication is going to do the best it can, but this is a real problem. Your cholesterol is over 300. We're going to medicate you for that, but this is genetic. There's nothing you can do about it. You have high blood pressure. We're going to medicate you for that. It's genetic. There's nothing you can do about it. You're a class 3 obese. Likely this is due to your genetics. There's not much you can do about it. You're at risk for cardiovascular events. You're at risk for all these. He just listed off all these consequences that were going to happen. He's like, these are going to be your future, and they're going to happen like within the next 5 to 10 years. And then he goes, Adam, if you want your life to get better, you just have to stop using drugs. And I thought to myself, that might be the worst advice I've ever heard. This person painted a future for me that was far worse than anything I'd ever imagined. Nothing about that future is something that I wanted to be a part of. And he said it in a way that said, this is your future. Well, if that's where I'm going, what urgency do I have to do anything different? Why would I want to change my diet? Why would I even want to take the medication? Why would I want to give up drugs if my life is going to be that freaking hard? I should take more drugs. I don't want to be present in that life. I don't want to be a part of that future. And I just remember thinking, I was like sitting back and I'm thinking, my gosh, this can't be true. Like this can't be like reality. And
Good.
all of a sudden, here comes Rip's voice. All of a sudden, here comes Essie's voice.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, here comes Jeff Novick and all these luminary doctors, and they're saying, Adam, this is not your fate. You remember what we said. You learned that all of these conditions that you're being told right now are happening inside of you, are not a result of your genetics. They are a result of your decisions. Yes, you're responsible. The fact that you find yourself in this chair right now with all these conditions is not because you're broken, it's because it makes sense. And if you want to, you know exactly what to do. If you decide to follow the instructions we gave you in 2010, you can reverse all of this. Your future can be safe, secure, and hopeful. I remember thinking in that moment, I don't want to know anything about addiction, depression, anxiety. That's not my goal. That is not my goal right now. I'm not trying to not use drugs. My goal is singular. I want to reverse engineer aliveness. That's what I want to do. I want to become the architect of a life that feels like such a safe, exciting place to show up and be present that drug use will be no longer necessary. So I decided in that moment to build my entire recovery on a foundation of plant-based nutrition. I moved into a sober living facility about after 37 days in a rehab hospital. And that's where I actually got to decide what I wanted to eat. And it's actually really funny. The way that it worked in the rehab in the sober living facilities, you would write out a list of things that you needed from the store and you give it to the house manager, and he would send a driver to go buy everything that you needed and for the other like 10 or 11 guys that were living at the house, and they would stock the kitchen with all the things so you can make your own meals and do everything like that. And so I wrote out this list and I walked up to the house manager, whose last name is actually Hamburger, and I said, I want to start a plant-based diet. Here's what I need. And he looked at me and goes, Adam, I have no idea what a plant-based diet is, but if that's what you need to be successful, you've got it. So my plant-based journey officially started in 2012 with a hamburger, which is just fantastic.
Wait, were you in touch with Rip Esselstyn at this point? Like teaching
No,
you more what a plant-based diet was? You just had that 7 days.
I just had the 7 days. And I was just like, look, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know any other way to do it. But I did hear this guy Rip talk about this way of doing it. So do that. I didn't have the book either. I remember when I wrote out that list, I was like, what am I gonna do? And I
Yeah.
just started I was like, okay, what was on the buffet at the retreat? And I was like, for breakfast, there was always oatmeal and fruit. For lunch, they I just remember them talking about rice and beans all day long. I was like, okay, rice and beans. And I remember them saying potatoes are fine. So I wrote potatoes. And I said, I don't know what veggies are good, so just get me frozen veggies and I'll make it work. And the list was like 6 items deep. Like that was it. And I gave it to the house manager, and he's like, is this really all you want? I said, well, yeah, but like get me enough of that to last a week, please. And I get up the next day. I'm the most motivated human you've ever met in your life. Like I'm so ready to do this thing. I walk into the kitchen, like literally strutting into the kitchen, and I open up the pantry, and there's the container of oats that I asked for. And they put it right next to a box of Fruity Pebbles, which is the greatest cereal of all time. Period.
Great.
End of story. And
Great.
I don't remember what happened next, but I like lost my mind. I mean, I threw a fit. I ran out of the house. I started crying. The assistant house manager, a guy named Luke Chittick, had to run after me and like grab me on the Venice boardwalk and like, Adam, dude, just let me tell you what we all saw, okay? We're all sitting at the kitchen table eating breakfast. You come walking into the kitchen, you open the pantry, and then you went berserk. Like you threw a towel at somebody and you ran out of the house. What happened? And I remember thinking, I know I said something awful to him because I was just like a punk and I just wanted to be angry. But he calmed me down and he walked me back to the house. I remember thinking to myself, that's a really good question. What happened?
Yeah.
Because I knew what I wanted to do and I knew how to do it.
Mm.
So what happened? Why couldn't I just do the thing? Why was this not a matter of intellect and will? And then I stumbled across probably the greatest 17 minutes of my life. I watched a TED talk by a guy named Dr. Doug Lisle called The Pleasure Trap. And I know for a fact my recovery journey actually started at the end of that 17-minute presentation. Because at the end of that 17-minute presentation, I understood what was actually taking place. I understood why it made sense that that felt hard. I understood why it makes sense if you know what to do to be happy and healthy. Why is it so difficult to do it? And I watched that 17 minutes and 10-second video 15 times probably in the next 24 hours. And I decided that I was going to follow the instructions of Dr. Doug Lisle. And the instructions of Doug Lisle is essentially how to reset your dopamine receptors, right? That the pleasure trap explains that humans have a range of experiencing pleasure that's appropriate to our psychology, meaning that when you engage in behaviors or consume foods that are representative of your natural history and your natural behavior, they'll fall within that pleasure range. So it's just good enough that you'll want it when you need it, but not so great that you'll risk your life to do it over and over again. And what I needed to do was build an environment that looked enough like one that is representative of my natural history and natural behavior, one that looks enough like my goals, and then just live there long enough.
Mm.
Instead of trying to outcompete the wrong toxic environment, make my environment look like my goals. And for nothing or no one, cross that line. Live there for 2 weeks. And if you do that, your dopamine receptors will regain 80% of their sensitivity. That was my mission. I was going to do it. So I went in, I built a very specific system of simple meals. And I decided that those meals were going to be they were going to be actions of self-care and self-love. They were going to be affirmations of recovery. This really kind of came home when I was having a talk with Luke, my assistant house manager, and he asked me about what it was like why I tried to end my life and what the whole experience felt like and why I think I lived. That's what he asked me. He goes, Adam, why do you think you didn't die? And I honestly believe that at the time I was just trying to blow him off. Like I was just angry that to talk about it. And so I said, I don't know, Luke, I guess my body didn't want me to die. And when my ears heard that sentence, all of a sudden I had to reevaluate this story that I've been telling myself my entire life. I had been convinced that my body was my adversary, that I was born into a terrible situation. Unfortunately, finding myself in a body that was always out to get me, was always going to be overweight, was always going to be bullied, was always going to have problems with schoolwork. And every single day was going to be an effort of restriction and exertion to try and outcompete an enemy that I never wanted to be a part of. But hearing those words, my body didn't want me to die, and attributing it to a moment when I could have died and didn't, all of a sudden I had to consider, wait a minute, what if the entire reason why I've made it through every single thing I've been through, the bullying, the drug use, the self-harm, the suicide attempt, is because I happen to find myself in a body that's been fighting for me since the day I was born. That I happen to find myself living inside of the greatest ally I have ever had. What if my body has never given up on me? What if instead of looking at what I do, looking at nutrition as a way of outcompeting my body, what if I look at it as an act of service to a body that is fighting like hell for me every single day? What if I finally become the caretaker of a body whose entire intention is for me to be the healthiest, happiest version of myself I could possibly be? Embodying that mission, within 5 months, I completely reversed my diabetes, my heart disease, and my erectile dysfunction. Within 10 months, I lost over 100 pounds. Within a year, I was off of every medication I was put on rehab, the antidepressants, the mood stabilizers, the sleeping medications, anxiety medications, ADHD medications, everything.
Yeah, hold on. I got to
Yeah.
interject because this is your, I mean, your story is so amazing. And all I can think of is that God didn't want you to die. You
Mm,
have God's breath of life in you, and is life was more powerful than death, and life will always be more powerful than death. And God loves you so much. He has a plan and purpose for your life, which is so far beyond what you can think or imagine. And
right?
he didn't allow you to die. And he didn't allow you to die because he's now equipped you with a mission and a purpose to heal people that are going through what you went through or similar, or even a portion or a fraction of what you've been through. And that's why you weren't supposed to go at that point. And that is a miracle that you didn't die, that you couldn't sabotage your life, that he wouldn't allow you to sabotage your life, that
You know,
life was so abundant in you.
I was Jewish by heritage for most of my life, but I always said I don't believe in God for most of my life, um, until getting into recovery.
Mm.
Until getting into recovery and witnessing just time and time again that there's got to be something else going on. I don't know what it is, and I don't know how to define it. But what I do know is you can't convince me that. So I'll say it like this, and this is going to be hard to get through. Um, I spent my entire life hating myself. I spent my entire life convinced I was ugly and unattractive and unenjoyable, and annoying to people, and then a burden and a criminal and a loser. I lived in that reality for my entire life. And then I surrendered myself to the reality that I don't know what's going on. And I committed myself to accepting that there might be something greater going on. And in 2022, I found myself on December 3rd of 2022. I found myself on a piece of a beautiful farm area outside of Austin, standing across from the most beautiful, intelligent, passionate, funny, exciting, wonderful woman you could ever meet, ever imagine, like the most perfect woman who has ever been. And listen to this woman say to me, I do.
Hmm.
I listened to this woman say to me that I love you so much. You're so worthy of love that I'll partner my life with you.
Hmm.
Now, if anything's ever going to convince me that God exists, it's that I got to marry the love of my life and I shouldn't have been alive in the first place.
Hmm.
I don't need to know how to define it. I don't need to know what to say, but you can't convince me that there isn't something greater going on when that day happened. Like that's the closest I've ever been to God ever. And so I definitely have reconsidered my stance on God a lot over the last 12 years. So there's just too many things. Like there's just, and it's like, you know what? I don't know. I don't know if it makes sense to want to live in a world where there isn't something as wonderful as what God can be. You don't have to define it in the way that other people do, however you want to do it, but like doesn't harm me to give myself permission to have a relationship with something beyond myself.
Oh my goodness. Not only does it not harm you, it gives you more than you can ask, think, or imagine. Having a relationship with the creator of everything is somehow got like lost in translation, that it's somehow bad or being forced on somebody. God doesn't force himself on anybody, and he is love. His essence is literally love. And no wonder why you felt his presence. And
Yeah,
it's interesting that you felt what you believed is God's presence, but nobody ever told you that. But your spirit knew that, wow,
yeah,
I feel God's presence in the presence of love because he is that. And
yeah,
it's amazing. Like nobody taught you that, nobody told you that, but you just knew. It's
yeah.
beautiful. And I on that topic, with addiction and with things that seem good, the
Mhm.
the enemy, the devil, wants to he first Jesus told us he comes to steal, kill, and destroy, and he presents himself as an angel of light. So he presents himself as, ooh, this will give you everything you want, but evil is all consuming, and it doesn't stand still, and it's not stagnant, and it will eventually be all consuming because you need more and more and more intense versions of whatever the substance that one is consuming. It never,
Right.
it goes until it's all consuming, and that's pure evil.
I'll give you an example. Doug Lyle talks about it like this. If you were to go out at night and you were to leave your porch light on, what you would notice is that there are moths and they're attracted to the light. And the reason why they're attracted to the light is because they are actually designed by nature to use celestial objects, stars and the moon, as navigation. They use them to figure out what's the right move to make in order to survive and make it to tomorrow. But when the brightest light in the sky is no longer the stars and the moon, when the brightest light in the sky is now your porch light, their survival instincts are misguided, they're confused, and they hit that light, they flutter down, then they hit it again, they hit it again, they hit it again, and then they die. And if you were to be outside watching this, you'd look at it and you go, that's interesting.
Hmm.
That moth, there must be something wrong with that moth. That moth must have its psychology must have gone wrong. And then you'd watch other moths follow suit. And you go, hang on a minute. Why in the world would those moths, having just witnessed that other one do it and die, why would they go do the exact same thing repeatedly over and over and over again until they died? What is going on with this generation of moths? There must be something wrong with them. But if you were to pause and consider from a subjective point of view, what's taking place inside that animal's mind is that it is thinking and feeling like it's being incredibly successful when in fact it's self-destructive. What's happened is by messing with the environment, by introducing a supernormal stimulus, a stimulus that was never supposed to be there, that was never supposed to exist, those animals now always run the threat of making poor decisions, potentially fatal ones, all the while being convinced they're doing the exact right thing. That's useful. What we are witnessing when we look outside of our windows and we observe society, what we're witnessing when we look at people who are overweight, they have heart disease, they have diabetes, they're developing certain cancers. When you're witnessing them do that, and they're eating these foods that cause these conditions, you're going, there must be something wrong with them. How would they keep doing it? And then why would their kids or their friends who are witnessing them do it, why would they keep doing it? There must be something wrong with this generation of people. There's absolutely nothing wrong with their psychology. There's absolutely nothing wrong with their biology. This is not their psychology and biology gone wrong. This is their psychology and biology doing exactly what it's predicted to do within environments gone terribly wrong. The modern obesity, diabetic, food epidemic that is happening is not weak people. That's not what it is. It is an environment that their psychology was never meant to defend itself against. That is what's going on. So, what I really appreciate about that perspective is that there's so many people who are trying to get healthy. And they look at examples of healthy people, people like you, people like me, people like Rip, who've done things, they've reversed conditions, they've achieved this incredible amount of health. And they go, well, hang on a minute, they did it. What's wrong with me? Why can't I do it? I must be the failure here. How else could you explain it? Those people could do it and I can't. I can't will myself to make a healthy choice when I leave outside the house every day. That's my problem. No, it's not your problem. The number one difference between people who are going to be successful in the long term versus people who are not is twofold. One, if I was to come to your house right now, Gianna, and I've been there, beautiful. And if I was to go into your kitchen, which is even equally beautiful, and I was to open up your refrigerator, would I find the opportunity to do the wrong thing?
I say essentially the same thing. Like I had needs and I was meeting those needs in a way that was destructive to me because I didn't know of a way that would bring abundance. And
Yeah.
I didn't know of a way to do that with ease. And that's why I was saying, there are things that we can engage in life that are easy. Like I don't want people to steer away thinking like everything's going to be hard that's good for us. Sometimes good
Right.
things come easy. Like God's
No,
grace.
no, no, absolutely.
And so like
Absolutely.
and sometimes the more challenging things like deferred gratification, totally worth it. But it's all for that desired beneficial outcome. And so I didn't know. I just didn't know that there was a way to meet my needs via abundance.
Right.
I didn't know.
Exactly. No,
And
you're
then
absolutely
I
right.
found out that's what's in my refrigerator.
And so what I would say is that the reason why you continue to be successful is number one, you decided what you want your life to look like. You got really clear. If I was to ask you to write out to me what is your best life, what does it look like? How do you feel when you get up in the morning? How do you feel when you go exercise? How do you feel when you're with your friends? Who are your friends? Right? What are you working towards? You would have very specific answers for every one of those, and they would come pretty quickly to you. You're very clear about who you are and how you want your life to be. And then instead of trying to do that in the wrong environment, you did several things. Number one, you made your home environment look like the life you want. And then you made your social environment look like the life you want. That's a really important step, and it's not an easy one. It's easy to say, all right, I want to eat a whole food plant-based diet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to figure out what are the foods that are whole plant foods that I like the most that will meet my needs. I'm going to put them in my house and I'm going to find the most simple and obvious and repeatable way to make meals that I like. And I'm just going to live in that environment long enough so that my body can show me what it's capable of. And once I get a sense of how valuable this is, I can make a really good decision. I can decide this is worth it or not. You got to commit though. You got to be there for like 21 days. You got to give your body the opportunity to show you what it's always been capable of doing. If you do it, I'm pretty darn sure that when your body gives you that signal and says, do you know what it's going to feel like in 6 months? Do you have any idea? This is just what 21 days feel like. Can you imagine? You're going to feel very resilient in your efforts to keep discovering how far this road goes. The other one is the social part, and that's a little bit difficult. You don't have to give up all of your friends. I would never ask you to give up any friends. But what you're likely going to need to do is make sure that the people you hang out with the most look enough like the life you want. And the reason for that is really important. You don't want to be explaining yourself all the time.
Yeah.
You don't want to have to defend your actions in front of people. What you want is to be able to go out into your community of shared respect. And just by being in their presence, they give you the opportunity to do life the way you want to do it. And you do the same for them. Uh, it's that sense of having a value that you can share within a community of shared respect. That's a very important part. And that's a part a lot of people miss because it's not an easy one. It's easy to eat a whole food plant-based diet 21 days straight in your home. But then when you go to a party with your friends and you try to do it, and all of them start asking you questions, why are you doing that? That looks stupid. What's this for? Like, there's no way you're going to do that for 21 days. That is debilitating and it's exhausting and it doesn't feel good. So finding at least two or three people that you can surround yourself with that are doing, they don't have to do it exactly like you, but they should do it enough like you, right? They don't have to be 100% whole food plant-based. They don't even have to be 100% plant-based, but they have to be enough so that when they're around you, they're like, oh yeah, we're going today, we're going to go out to eat. We're going to go to, you know, what's your favorite plant-based restaurant in LA, Gianna?
Lotus vegan.
We're going to go there. Let's go. And they're like, great, that's fine. We can eat there too. I mean, we eat mostly plants. Awesome. I'm down to try that. None of this, "Oh, we're going to go to that vegan spot." Like, you don't want that. It doesn't feel good. That's a really important part. And so that I think is so important into building the life that you want.
I've dealt with people in my life, loved ones that have passed away from drug addiction,
Yeah.
and it's devastating. And I have a friend who's sort of dealing with that, or she's dealt with it in her life. And I always recommend a whole food plant-based diet. You don't even need to be sick. You don't need to be addicted to anything. Just eat plants, save the
Right.
animals, be good to the earth, be good to yourself.
Exactly. Exactly.
Brings health. Like, even if you're healthy, you can get healthier. And so I said to her, what if, because the food that we eat impacts every area of our lives, it will only help this person? And she said, Gianna, are you really telling me that eating plants is really going to help drug addiction? And I said, absolutely. And so you specifically did a study on this. So
Yeah.
please
Yeah.
tell us about it.
Yes. Yeah. So after I got out of, I spent 11 months in recovery, like in rehab hospital or in a sober living setting. And during that time, I went through most of it with the same people. And what I witnessed was a really interesting observation. I noticed that at the end of those 11 months, when I checked in on day one, I was the sickest, most disconnected from life I'd ever been. And when I left recovery 11 months later, I was the healthiest, most excited to be present in life that I'd ever been. And when I witnessed other people who I went through recovery with, they were all equally determined to discover this thing of how do I live life without drugs. That's what they were all trying to do. But I noticed that a lot of them maintained their medications. A lot of them actually went on higher dosages of those medications, on more medications. A lot of them gained weight. Certainly, none of them created a sense that life was a much more safe or exciting place to be in terms of like their physical health. And I said, well, that's really interesting. Well, I wonder if there's any research out there that suggests or could demonstrate that perhaps nutrition played a role, that did my very specific dietary pattern that I employed. Everyone else was just eating food. I decided to make a very specific and appropriate dietary pattern through that recovery journey. Was there any evidence that that played a role? And what I came to find out was there had never been a study, not a single study investigating the effects of nutrition on addiction recovery outcomes in treatment facilities, right? And I was like, oh, that's really ridiculous. I mean, the most controlled variable in rehab hospitals is what you eat and when you eat. Like, everybody eats the same thing. They all eat the same time. You can't get food in. You can't send food out. Like, oh my gosh, that's a controlled variable that they could have studied for years and they never had.
Hmm.
And I would just remain really angry that I had no evidence to support my belief for about a year. And then one day I just woke up and said, you know what? Why don't you just do it yourself? Like, just you go back to school, study nutrition, and figure out how to do it. So in 2018, I've had the opportunity to do it. I had met amazing friends. You know them, doctors Dean and Aisha Shirzai. And I met them at Plantstock. They had spoken. They're probably the world's leading authority on cognitive function, brain function, and the impact of lifestyle on those variables. And I walked up to Dean and Aisha and I said, can I ask you a question? Do you know of any evidence that suggests that plant-based nutrition can help addiction recovery? And they said, Unfortunately, there's no evidence suggesting that it can because there's no evidence, no studies have ever been done. And I said, well, I'm going to do that study, but I need some MDs on the study in order to do it. Would you? I'm not asking you to be the MDs, but I'm asking, would you be willing to consult? Maybe give us some research studies that we could compare against or whatever. And they said, well, yeah, of course, we'll send you information, we'll send you some research studies, and they said, but Adam, we'll just do the study with you. And I said, I was like, oh my God, are you kidding? Like, seriously? And they said, yeah, absolutely, Adam, we would love to do the study. And so not only did they agree to do the study, they did it for free. They were
Wow.
so committed to bringing valuable knowledge that didn't exist into the world. They were MDs on the study. I didn't pay them a dime. Like, they're remarkable. So we had this incredible team led by me. Our lead researcher is Dr. Tara Kemp. She's remarkable. You know Tara.
She is
Um,
amazing.
and we had Dean and Aisha Sherzai and Jay Sutliff. And we ran a study on a treatment facility in Austin, Texas called Infinite Recovery, which is why the study is called the Infinite Study. And what we wanted to do was investigate the effects of a whole food plant-based diet on a population of individuals who are in the treatment facility. So this is like early stage recovery. And the way it works is after leaving the detox phase of rehab, they would go into the standard, the regular area of the rehab hospital. And within 48 hours of leaving rehab, they were presented with a video that talked to them about the study, gave them the opportunity to understand what it is and decide whether they wanted to be a part of it. It's just never a good idea to pitch people in detox. Like, they don't want to listen to anything. And so we gave people the opportunity to join the study, and we gave them the choice to choose which group they wanted to be in. Now, I know that means this isn't a randomized controlled trial, and here's why I think it's important. One, life isn't a randomized controlled trial. You make choices yourself. Number two, this is the most important reason. In recovery, when people are given the opportunity to choose, they do better.
Mm.
And I don't care who in the world of academia wants to scrutinize the fact that this isn't a randomized controlled trial. I would never jeopardize someone's recovery by randomly assigning to something that they're not going to feel good about. So we had a whole food plant-based group, and we had the control group, which ate the diet that was being served at the treatment facility, which, to be fair, was actually a really good dietary pattern. It had a large amount of whole foods and vegetables in it.
What was it
And
like a normal kind of
what we
health?
call like a Western paleo style, diet. There were certainly, like, in the snack hours, like, there were some processed foods like string cheese and stuff like that. But to be honest, like, compared to what you typically see in rehab, this was pretty good, like really good. In addition to that, each group was given nutrition curriculum that matched their diet. So the control group got like standard ADA diet stuff, and the treatment group got a curriculum built around whole food plant-based nutrition. I wanted them to understand it. I wanted them to have an understanding of the efficacy that they were giving themselves. Like, what was it going to do for them?
Yeah, that's
And
smart.
then we followed those individuals for 10 weeks, 3 of the weeks in the rehab hospital setting and 7 in sober living. And we measured a whole host of outcomes, biomarkers for lipids, vitamin levels, omega-3 levels, microbiome studies. So there were fecal samples taken. We did every psychological evaluation: depression, anxiety, mania, drug use. And then we decided on 3 specific outcomes that were the most important. We came to find out that there actually isn't a singular definition of recovery. There isn't one that exists. So we decided, if we're going to measure recovery, we should look at the 3 most important outcomes to predict long-term outcomes, like the people who do best the longest. What are the outcomes? What are the measurable outcomes that we could use that are already being measured that predict whether someone's going to do well within the first year? What we came to find out is that those outcomes are resilience, self-esteem, and self-compassion.
Hmm.
These are the 3 most important outcomes. And what we found in the study was that at 10 weeks, there was a statistically significant increase in self-esteem, resilience, and self-compassion within the plant-based group. In fact, of all the outcomes, the only group that did better than the other group in any of them was the plant-based group, which is really amazing. First of all, I want to say this: every group experienced beneficial outcomes across the board, which says 2 things. One, Infinite Recovery does a great job. They have a great program. It seems to be beneficial for every outcome. It also demonstrates and kind of puts to bed a really tired story that if you don't eat fish or if you neglect certain food groups, you're going to be hindering your recovery. There's always been a story that like plant-based diets might not be good for people in addiction recovery. What we now know, based on the evidence, is that at the least, a plant-based diet is as good as any dietary pattern out there for addiction recovery, and it might be the best diet for addiction recovery. So individuals who are curious, were saying, hey, you know what? I heard a lot about plant-based diet. I'd like to try one in rehab. They should feel very confident that that choice is not going to do anything to them other than potentially increase their treatment effects over the course of time. So that's great. I was really excited to publish that study in the American Journal of Lifestyle Medicine. It got featured in Forbes and Psychology Today. And there's,
It's amazing. I didn't
yeah.
know that.
And a lot of people say, Adam, why do you think that happens? Why do you think you saw those increases? People say, is it because of the microbiome? Is it because of the change in the gut health? Is it all these things? It's like, well, yeah, sure. It is, of course, those things. But here's what I think is actually taking place that's playing the biggest role. And I'll use myself as an example to explain this variable. When I checked into treatment, I didn't like myself at all. I didn't like my life. I didn't want to be present in it. I had no interest in my future. I didn't want to be a part of my future. My future felt like a very unsafe and scary place to be a part of. In fact, thinking of it made me anxious, right? So all I wanted to do was use and escape. All I wanted to do was get the heck out of being present in my life, right? I didn't want to think about what 5 years was going to be. That was terrifying. In rehab, I quickly adopted a plant-based diet. I didn't know what it was going to do. I was confident it was the right move to make, but I wasn't sure. By about month one, month two, I'd lost like 60 pounds. My medications were cut in half. My diseases were reversing. Getting out of bed, moving my body didn't hurt. I also had this really amazing sense that, like, man, seems like I may have figured this thing out. If this is what 2 months looks like, when I look down the trajectory of my life and I think about what it's going to be like in 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, I'm actually excited about that for the first time. Day one, if I looked at the trajectory of my life, it was downhill and it was downhill fast. Within 1 month, all of a sudden, that trajectory had shifted. And thinking about my future now felt exciting and safe and hopeful. That builds resilience. It builds resilience in a very special and unique way. It builds resilience in your efforts. It builds resilience in the efforts that you have been putting forth every single day that have created that trajectory to shift. What I like to tell people is that resilience isn't just mental toughness in the face of adversity. It requires something else. It requires a tomorrow that you want to be a part of. Mm. It requires a place beyond today that feels safe, secure, and hopeful, that when the moments get tough, you're not only able to fight, you're willing to fight so that you can see the reality of that place come to life and be present for it. When you feel that need to be resilient, it's only because there's something worth being resilient for. There's something that you want to be a part of. You've got to get there. And when you have a sense that there's an effort that you've been employing every single day, and you're confident that it's that effort that's getting you there, you are now going to employ that effort every single day with unbelievable enthusiasm. This is my thing, and I'm getting there because of it. I think that's one of the reasons why we saw this resilience rise in individuals within the plant-based group. I also noticed probably the reason why you saw self-esteem increase is because if you were to be a person who struggles with end-stage substance use disorder, and end-stage substance use disorders is a terrifying experience. Nobody's tomorrow is promised, but for those individuals, it's a lot less promised. And when they look around at the people in their life, what they notice is that none of them are dealing with that problem. And they don't seem to have any need to employ any effort in order to not deal with it. They just get up and they never have an issue. They don't have to struggle with not using. Using isn't an issue whatsoever. Being sober is just who they are, and it's easy for them. And so there's this sense that, gosh, if I just get sober, I'm just now doing what they do every single day without even thinking about it. That's not anything worthy of applause. That doesn't raise my self-esteem. I don't feel good. I feel like now, in order to be normal, I have to do so much work. If instead of just saying, how do I not use, which is passive recovery, if instead you actively replace that use with something that is incredibly valuable, not to yourself, but to the world around you, like learning how to be healthy,
Mm.
if you replace that use with something that changes your opportunity to be something of a lighthouse for people,
Yeah.
something that if they needed your help, they could come to you and ask for it. All of a sudden, now that effort is worthy of applause. Now, the fact that you've done that thing in recovery, you are now worthy of applause by the world around you. That raises your self esteem. You now have something of value to share with other people. You're not just a person who doesn't use anymore. You're a person who replaced their use by gaining knowledge of how to take charge of their life. That's a very different thing. And I think that that's why we saw those changes take place.
I don't know if you've ever heard this verse, but Apostle Paul wrote it, and I want to read it because it literally made me think of what you were saying. It's so similar.
Yeah.
So it's Romans 5, and it says, Jesus leads us into a place of radical grace where we are able to celebrate the hope of experiencing God's glory. And that's not all. We also celebrate in seasons of suffering because we know that when we suffer, we develop endurance, which shapes our characters. And when our characters are refined, we learn what it means to hope and anticipate God's goodness. And hope will never fail to satisfy our deepest need because the Holy Spirit that was given to us has flooded our hearts with God's love.
You know what that makes me think of? So I really like to talk about this a lot, is that people ask me, why do you think you were so determined to do what you did in recovery, in rehab? Like why? Like why would you do that? Like why when getting sober is hard enough? Why would you be willing to get sober and go plant-based and do all these other things? Like, why would you want to do that? And a lot of people say, what, find your why, right? And of course, a lot of people would look at me then and go, well, that's obvious. He's 350 pounds. He has diabetes and heart disease. He nearly died from substance use disorder and suicide. So, of course, that's why he's doing it. How could that not be why he wants to change? And it is true, every one of those things was occurring. None of them were my motivation. I don't think anyone on earth is motivated by negative consequences.
Mm.
I think what negative consequences do for us is they let us know that there are loving and meaningful bonds in our lives that are being threatened.
Mm.
And it is those loving and meaningful bonds, those irreplaceable bonds in life, the ones that when they are threatened enough, you will fight like hell to protect.
Mm.
It's those things that get you to do what you do.
Mm.
It's those things that get you to learn something new or to be better at something you already do. That's why you do anything in life. It isn't, I like to say, people don't people don't care for their diabetes because people don't care about their diabetes. What they care about is what their diabetes can take from them.
Mm.
You know, you only care for what you care about, and no one cares about their disease. They care about what happens if they don't get rid of it. They care about not seeing their grandkids. They care about not being present in their life. They care about not smelling the fresh air or walking outside. They care about all of the things that give you the experience of being meaningfully alive. That is your why. That is your motivation. And so when I think about what you just read, you talked about seeing something in your life, irreplaceable, undeniable, that when threatened becomes front and center. This is why you are. This is who you are. This is why you take every single day seriously. And it is right now being threatened. What are you going to do about it? That's what this whole thing is about.
Mm.
It's recognizing that you have the opportunity to build the most incredible, meaningful, and unforgettable life if you want to. It's not always going to be the same as everybody else. It doesn't need to be the same as everybody else. But if you're focused on what you're going to lose, right? If you're focused on what is wrong with you, every single day you're going to get up and find out, well, what's wrong with me? And what's happening is you're not putting your attention on why it matters that there's something wrong, why it matters that you have your focus there, right? Why does it matter that you make it to tomorrow? That is why. So that when you read that, that's what kind of came to my mind.
Your story has always blessed people when they hear it, and it's blessed me the times that I've heard it and on Switch for Good and listening yesterday to Simon and your interview, and it just you're so inspirational. Like that adjective truly defines you, Adam. You're
Oh,
so
thank you so much.
and when you were younger and you were diagnosed with ADHD, I feel like there are so many things that are making people have those symptoms that are diet.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Oh
the
yeah,
brain is inflamed. The body can't sit still because of what is going in the tank. And
yeah,
just to throw a pill at somebody is not the only thing that could be detrimental and create addiction or creates an identity. And then people fall in line with that identity and what's been put over them by somebody who doesn't really know how to manage the actual thing that's causing this and not just throw a band-aid on it. And there's so much more that happens than just, oh, this pill will fix it, because an identity is being proclaimed over somebody that's unjust, and it doesn't need to be there, and then it creates so many more problems.
absolutely. When you look at the environment that we're in right now, it looks nothing like what is representative of our natural history and our natural behavior. And remember, you have a psychology that is about 10,000 years old, right? So your instincts are perceiving the world as if it was 10,000 years ago. They haven't caught up to today. And so they're not equipped to defend themselves against it. And we have an environment that is designed to steal our focus always. There's a great book actually written by a British journalist named Johan Hari called Stolen Focus, which is a phenomenal book. Highly recommend it.
Yeah.
But what we're seeing typically in the rise of the ADHD diagnosis is that, there isn't, ADHD is a cluster of symptoms that occurs. And when enough of them occur, they diagnose an individual with ADHD. And I like what Jordan Peterson has to say about stimulant-based medication. I'm a huge fan of Jordan Peterson, by the way.
Right.
He says that Adderall is a drug invented to modify the behavior of bored boys.
Hmm.
That when you put, he says, obviously it's not good for girls either, but when you look at the modern school system and you look at the psychology of young boys are adventurers by nature. Right? They want to run around. They want to wrestle with. They're trying to figure out who's the alpha, who's the leader of the pack. They don't want to sit around. They want to go have adventures. They want to go climb things. They don't want to sit in a room and be told to be quiet and listen to things that don't interest them. And so, in order to modify their personality, in order to do that, they medicate them. And that's not okay. Now, I'm not saying I'm against medication, but I am aware that that seems to be a tactic that's playing out. Because as soon as we became aware that Ritalin does that for kids, all of a sudden, the number of prescriptions for stimulant-based medications since then has skyrocketed. Like it is astronomical. The millions and millions and millions of prescriptions for stimulant-based medications on kids younger than age 12. And that is just, instead of saying, wait a minute here, we have a problem.
Right. Right.
Clearly, the system that we are using to educate children and get them equipped for life just does not suit their needs. Instead of medicating these kids in order to allow them to be in class and not just be disruptive, to modify their behavior to fit the system, why don't we adjust the system? Why don't we adjust the system to be more aligned with what is appropriate for their psychology? That's not going to happen. Of course, it's not. But that is a very large factor in why we are seeing so many children being diagnosed with ADHD and then immediately applied with a very real stimulant-based medication.
When there are other options.
Look at this. Listen to this. So big thing that has come up in the last kind of 15 years is what we call video game addiction, right? With the now esports and everything, and everyone's like, I don't know, I don't get it. Like, I can't get my kids to stop playing video games. I don't understand. Why are they all addicted to video games? Why are they all addicted? Video games are dangerous. That's what they're saying. Well, why don't we pause and consider what's actually taking place? So anything that is good for your survival, you have a sensitivity to. So you'll notice that you have a very attuned hunger cues, right? You're sensitive to your hunger, very, very sensitive to it. You don't only notice either being starving or full. That wouldn't be good for your survival because 100,000 years ago, if you were walking around 50 miles from your village and all of a sudden you just notice, hey, I'm starving, I should have eaten an hour ago, you might not make it back. You have very subtle sensitivity to hunger. That's really important. Same thing with temperature. You don't notice a temperature change of 30 degrees. You notice about a half degree or 1 degree change in temperature in the room. That's important for your survival for the very same reason. If you're out in nature, if you're exposed, you need to know what's happening. It's important for your survival. Turns out what people think about you is important to your survival. It always has been. In fact, if you were to be in your village and you would be surrounded by about 5 people within the village, that would be your clique. You'd want to know where you kind of rank within that group, rank being the amount of value you offer everyone that keeps everyone alive longer. And actually, your psychology does really well comparing itself to about 5 to 10 people per day. Like it's really good at doing that. And it wants to do that. It's important for you developing your personality and your individuality. I'll give you an example. When you and I were little, and we go to school like in fourth grade, and I walked in and I saw on TV a guy wear his hat like this. And so I walk in like this, and my friend comes up and he goes, Adam, listen, I love you, but you got to take that hat off. All right, you got to take that hat off right now. He's not insulting me. What he's doing is he's letting me know that that is not valuable for my survival. The tribe might not like that you did that. They might think it's not a good idea to have you around. People might not want to be seen around you, might lower the status. That's fine. This person is a real person in my life. I know that they know everything else about me, and they're not just there to make me look stupid or tell me that I look stupid. Let's fast forward to today, where kids are now comparing themselves to about 100,000 people who are not real people in their life every single day. And their psychology is not equipped to defend it. They're comparing themselves to people who are not real in their life. They never will be. And the world doesn't make sense to them. So where do they run when the world doesn't make sense? They run to a world that has very defined rules. They run to a world that has defined rules that cannot be changed, and they immediately have a place of value within that world, like Fortnite. In Fortnite, you're part of a group, and in that group, you have a very specific role. And in that specific role, you can get really good at it and rank up. And people say, oh, that's so and so. They're really good at that. I'm so glad they're here. We need them here. They're awesome. All of a sudden, that video game world makes a lot more sense and feels a lot safer than the world around them.
Mm.
So, again, when we think about how do we look at the world around us, how do we find our place in the world, we need to start to reorganize our environment to look like one that is safe for our psychology. People need to rise and fall with the rhythm of nature. You need to get up with light. You need to go to bed with light at the end of the day. We need to be out in nature. We need to be around real people who care for us. We need
Mm.
to be around people that offer value to the goings on of our lives, and we do the same for them. We need to have a belief in something beyond ourselves. We need to feel like there's a greater goings on and we're a part of it. And we need to have a value, a purpose beyond ourselves that is seen by others and valued by others, and that we do the same for them. We need to have a loving and meaningful bond with ourselves, both physically and emotionally, that we want to show up and be present for every single day. When we have those bonds fully connected, all of a sudden the need to distract yourself from your actual life diminishes.
Mm.
All of a sudden, the desire to not be present in your life goes away. Why would you not want to be present in a life that makes sense, feels safe, and feels hopeful?
Totally. I want to end on a quote of yours that inspired me.
Okay.
Listening looks a lot like loving, so much so that people can't tell the difference. So
Yeah.
thank you for giving us, me, and the audience an opportunity to listen to you and love on you because you are so worthy of love.
Oh, thank you so much, Gianna.
Thanks so much for tuning in. Love, Gianna, and
Adam said.
perfect.